Hi, this is Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to talk about a pen that I'm surprised that more people don't know about, and it's gotten relatively little attention. This is the Lamy Ideos, or Ideos. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to say it. Maybe that's part of the issue with the pen. I think maybe also it's a timing thing. This pen seems to have come out around 4 years ago, and that would have been around the time of the COVID epidemic, and maybe it wasn't easily available. I'm not quite sure, but it didn't get a huge amount of reviews. And what surprised me is that it's a really beautiful pen. But now, if you go on Lamy's own website, it's not available. There are several pen dealers that still sell it. It may also be about, in terms of pricing, it's sort of in the middle. It's not an expensive pen like the Lamy Safari. It lists for $139. You can get it around $110, and it doesn't have a gold nib. So maybe it's odd because it's in that sort of middle place. I'm not sure. But anyway, the point is that I don't think it's been terribly successful. And that surprises me because I think it's a particularly beautiful and unusual looking pen. This is the Palladium version of the pen. I think that's the only version that there is. And one of the things that's very unusual about it is that it has this kind of tear-shaped barrel. And you can imagine the amount of design engineering that had to go into this in order to make the whole thing fit together. And it does so very, very well. It has a snap to it, which is very nice. It uses a nib that's not unlike the Safari nib, but actually was developed for the Aeon. That's Jasper Morrison's pen that I've reviewed, which I think this in some ways relates to. As in the great tradition of Lamy, this is, again, Lamy goes outside of the company and got very well-known designers. In this case, the EOOS Design Studio. That studio was founded in 1995, and it's three people. It's Martin Bergman, Gernot Bowman, and Harold Grunt. And they are actually Austrian. And it's a really interesting firm. A lot of their best known work is furniture design. They design for people like Knoll. And they're very much in the tradition of, let's say, Saarinen and Eames. Very much in the tradition of mid-century modern design, but also they are very involved with sustainability and coming up with designs for example, a special toilet that doesn't use a lot of water, or various kinds of plumbing that doesn't use a lot of water when you wash your hands, so that this can be used in areas where water is a rare resource, right? It's not something you want to waste. So they're not just involved in making high-end, beautiful objects and design. They also are involved in sustainability, and I think that's very interesting. They talk about their process of analysis as being one of what they call poetical analysis, which involves looking at a particular product, how does it function from a contemporary perspective, but also looking at the history of that pen or object, both creating something that looks new, but at the same time fits a particular tradition. And I think that's very clear that they're doing that in the case of Lamy. So when you look at the Ideos pen, you see that in a way it does follow this design principle. It looks very contemporary, and yet it goes back into the tradition of Lamy. You can see that it goes back to the Lamy 2000, particularly the chrome version, which was designed by Gerd Mueller in the 1960s. And in a way, too, I think it goes back to the Lamy Safari, particularly if you look at one of the aluminum all-star versions. There is a relationship, I think, to that pen. And more recently, there is the Scala pen, which the Seeger design group in Germany designed. I think that pen is closer to this pen than any of the others. If we open them up, you can see how that looks. And then there's also the Jasper Morrison Aeon pen. Now, actually, the nib on the Ideos is the same kind of nib that is on the Aeon pen that was developed for the Aeon. It's slightly different. It's similar. It writes very similar to the kind of nib that's on a Lamy Safari. These are steel nibs, but it is slightly shaped and formed a little bit differently from that nib, which is also on the Lamy Studio. It's very interesting, the work that went into making this pen, because it has a very unusual profile. It's a bit hard to make it out in the camera, but if you look at it from this way, it's a tear shape. It has this tear shape. Let me make sure this is. So it's a tear shape, and the whole pen is tear shaped all the way down to the nib, which then is round. So that actually, I think, from an engineering perspective, is really quite tricky and is beautiful. In some ways, to me, reminds me of the EOOS 360 and its triangular form. I finally actually got a real EOOS pen, by the way. Here it is. So if we look at it this way, you can really see what I'm talking about. And this is tricky to engineer this and make sure that it all fits together so perfectly. And I think they did a really amazing job on this pen, which is so relatively affordable. Now, one of the other innovations of the pen is the way in which it opens. It twists like this, and then here it has a cartridge. It will also use a Lamy converter. This is the Lamy Z27 converter. That's different from the converters that are in the Safari. It doesn't have these two little plastic nibs that fit into the Safari. You need it not to have that, and then it will then fit perfectly into this pen. When I got the pen, it did not come with a converter, so that's important to keep that in mind. You may have to get that extra. On Lamy's website, it says that the converter is included, but it wasn't when I got mine version. You have to be careful when you put it together also, because you can put it together backwards, but if you look at it, there's these two little parts that fit in, and this goes like that. One of the problems with the pen is that if you don't get it exactly right, it doesn't come together so easily. You have to sort of gently fit it in, and then it clicks. But once it's clicked, it fits very, very nicely. Now you can get the pen in fine, medium, extra fine, and broad. I have here a broad nib. Actually, when I bought the pen, I had a fine nib on it, but I had have a lot of Aeon pens, and I took one of the broad pen nibs from the Aeon pen and put it on this because I prefer a broader nib. And but typical of Lamy, I think the nibs are very smooth. A tiny bit of feedback, not any flex to it, of course. So how does it write? It's the Lamy Ideos, or Ideos. It's broad nib, Lamy cartridge, rhodia paper. It's a little bit dry. No flex to it at all. It's not scratchy. It writes pretty much similar to the way in which a Safari pen writes. So you have to keep in mind you're paying a little over $100 for a pen, and it writes not unlike a pen that's $30. But of course it's made out of metal and it's really quite elegant looking. One thing I have to say about it is that because of its odd shape, it's not so easy to put together. So for example, if I take it apart again and I try to put it back together, you have to get it exactly right, and then you have to click it, and it does fit together, but it's a little tricky. And then even when you post it, it's tricky. It doesn't easily post because you have to again get it exactly right. And if you're somebody who's taking the cap on and off all day, that can be a problem. The pen also I think doesn't look good posted. It's too long, way too long. So that's a design problem. So I can see perhaps where this pen sort of missed. It doesn't quite work, I think, is the problem from a design perspective. It looks best when it is closed, for sure. But again, you got to make sure that you line it up right. When it looks like this, it really is quite elegant. And it reminds me actually of the Aurora Hastel pen a little bit. It has some of the elegance going back to 1970 when this was designed. So it's definitely elegant looking, and it writes reasonably well and feels decent in the hand. But I don't think it doesn't quite make it into the classic, right? And it's a little too finicky, I think. As a design, I think they kind of missed. Other awkward qualities about it. I mean, look at the way the clip works. So you kind of think of the pen as going this way, but then the clip is sort of on the side. So if it goes like this, well, then it looks just like it's a round pen. So then what's the point? So that's another thing that seems a little off in terms of the design, a little strange. I forgot to mention that in terms of the clip, it's a nice rocker clip. That's a nice element to the pen. Anyway, I enjoy having this in my collection. I think it's an interesting pen, but perhaps not one of my favorite Lamy pens.